My name is Emily, and I am 29 years old. And before you judge what I'm about to say, you need to understand something. I didn't grow up in a broken home. There was no screaming every night, no bruises to point at, no neighbors calling the police. What I grew up in was something quieter, something colder, something that doesn't leave marks on your skin, but stays with you forever. I grew up in a house where love was measured, compared, distributed unevenly. From the outside, my family looked perfect. 2 parents, 2 daughters, a clean home, a stable life. But inside that house, there were rules no one ever explained out loud. And the first rule was simple. My sister mattered more. Her name is Sophia. She's 2 years older than me. And from the moment she was born, she was everything my parents wanted. She was confident, loud in the right way, pretty in the way my mother approved of, smart in the way my father could brag about. And then there was me, quiet, observant, careful. I learned very early that being quiet didn't make me easier to love. It just made me easier to ignore. Some of my earliest memories aren't dramatic. They're small moments. Mom clapping when Sophia showed her a drawing, then barely looking when I held mine up. Dad attending Sophia's school performances, sitting front row with his phone out, recording. And later telling me he was too tired to come to mine. At dinner, Sophia talked. Everyone listened. When I talked, someone interrupted, or corrected me, or laughed like I'd said something cute, but unimportant. No one ever said, "We love her more." They didn't have to. It was in the tone, the patience, the way mistakes were handled. When Sophia failed, it was stress, pressure, bad luck. When I failed, it was my attitude, my effort, my fault. I became the child who tried harder, not because I wanted praise, but because I thought, maybe one day, if I did everything right, they'd finally see me. I got good grades, not great, perfect. I cleaned without being asked, stayed out of trouble, learned how to disappear when needed. And for a while, I believed that if I kept shrinking myself, I'd fit into whatever space they were willing to give me. But love doesn't work like that. It doesn't grow because you earn it. It grows because someone chooses you. And my parents had already chosen. As we got older, the gap between us widened. Sophia was encouraged to dream big, to speak up, to take risks. I was encouraged to be realistic, careful, grateful. When it came time for college, my parents sat us down. They told Sophia she could go anywhere she wanted, that they'd help with tuition, housing, everything. Then they looked at me and said maybe community college would be smarter, cheaper, more practical. I remember nodding, smiling, pretending it didn't hurt. I remember going to my room that night and sitting on the floor, asking myself what I had done wrong. The answer, I would later learn, was nothing. Sophia went away. I stayed behind. She came home with stories, confidence, and a sense of ownership over the world. I came home with exhaustion and the quiet realization that I was on my own. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, I became the difficult one, the distant one, the ungrateful one. Because when you stop begging for crumbs, people who benefited from your silence get uncomfortable. Sophia noticed too. She learned how to use it. If she wanted something, she'd mention how Emily doesn't really need help. How I was independent. How I always figured things out. And my parents nodded, relieved. Because independence is convenient when you don't want to show up for someone. The turning point came when I was 22. I had landed a decent job. Nothing flashy, but something I was proud of. I told my parents at dinner. My mother smiled politely. My father said, "That's good experience." Then Sophia announced she was starting a business idea. Suddenly, the energy changed. Questions, excitement, offers of financial support. I sat there, fork in my hand, feeling invisible. That night, for the first time in my life, I said something. I told them it hurt, that it felt like I was always second. The room went silent. Then my mother sighed and said, "Why are you always so sensitive?" My father said, "You're imagining things." Sophia didn't say anything. She just watched. And in that moment, something in me broke and healed at the same time. Because I realized the truth. They weren't going to change. They weren't going to hear me. And waiting for them to suddenly love me the way I needed was only hurting me. So I stopped trying. I moved out a few months later. I didn't announce it dramatically. I just left. Calls became texts. Texts became silence. Holidays were optional. Birthdays were short messages. Sophia stayed close. She always did. She worked with my father, lived near my parents, was present in every way I never had been allowed to be. And people praised her for it. She's such a good daughter. She takes care of them. She's always there. No one asked why I wasn't. Years passed. Then came the phone call. My parents had been in an accident. By the time I got there, it was too late. Standing in that hospital hallway, I expected something. Regret, anger, sadness. What I felt instead was emptiness. At the funeral, people hugged Sophia. They whispered to her. They cried with her. I stood a few steps behind, unseen once again. And as I watched her accept condolences, I realized something else. Even in death, my parents had left behind one final moment where I would be reminded of my place. The will reading. I already knew how it would go. Sophia would inherit the house, the accounts, the business. I would inherit silence. And yet, a small part of me still showed up. Not because I expected anything, but because I needed closure. What I didn't know then was that the story wasn't over, and that the next room I walked into would change everything I thought I understood about my family. The lawyer's office was quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just heavy. The kind of quiet where every breath feels too loud. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I didn't want to walk in after my sister and feel like an afterthought again. I sat alone in one of the chairs, hands folded in my lap, staring at a framed photo on the wall I didn't care about. I kept telling myself one thing. This is just paperwork. It doesn't define you. It never did. But deep down, I already knew. This was the final judgment, the last comparison. The moment where everything I had felt my entire life would be confirmed in black ink. When Sophia walked in, she didn't look at me right away. She greeted the lawyer by name, asked how his family was, sat confidently, like she belonged there. Then she glanced at me. Her eyes flicked over my face for half a second. Not curious, not surprised, satisfied. She was dressed perfectly. Soft black dress, minimal makeup. The kind of grief that photographs well. People say everyone mourns differently. But I had seen Sophia long enough to recognize performance. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. He spoke about my parents respectfully. Their lives, their hard work, their intention to provide for their loved ones. Loved ones. The words felt ironic. Then he started listing assets, the family house, left to Sophia, their primary savings account, left to Sophia, the investment portfolio my father loved to talk about, left to Sophia. Each sentence landed like a quiet slap. I didn't react. I didn't gasp or cry or shift in my seat. I had lived this moment in my head 1,000 times already. This was just the confirmation. Sophia nodded occasionally, as if she were listening politely to a weather report. At one point, she glanced at me again, just long enough to see if I was watching. I was, and I saw the corner of her mouth lift. Not a smile. something smaller, colder. As the list continued, something strange happened. I stopped feeling sad. Instead, I felt small, like I was 12 again, standing in the kitchen while my parents praised her for something I had also done better, but quietly. The lawyer moved on to personal items, jewelry, family heirlooms, even my mother's wedding ring, all to Sophia. That one hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted it, but because it was proof that even sentiment, even memory, wasn't meant for me. I wasn't trusted with it. The lawyer paused. He looked at his notes. Then he said, "That concludes the primary distributions." Primary. I waited. He didn't say my name. No pause for clarification. No mention of me at all. Silence filled the room, the kind that presses on your chest. Sophia leaned back in her chair, relaxed. She crossed her legs slowly. Then, without looking at me, she spoke. "I assume that's everything." The lawyer hesitated. I noticed it. A brief moment where his eyes flicked to another page. Then he said, "There is one additional item." Sophia exhaled, almost amused. "Yes?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "This pertains to you, Sophia. You are granted full access to the estate under the conditions outlined." Conditions. Sophia nodded again, already tuning out. I could tell she wasn't listening anymore. Why would she? She had already won. The lawyer continued explaining responsibilities, maintenance, legal obligations. I didn't hear most of it. My mind kept replaying one thought. They really did it. They really left me nothing. Not even a sentence. Not even an acknowledgement. I wasn't angry. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed that a part of me had still hoped. Embarrassed that I had shown up at all. Sophia stood up. She thanked the lawyer warmly. Then she turned to me. Her voice was soft, sympathetic. "Emily, I know this is hard." I looked at her. Really looked at her. And I saw it clearly for the first time. She didn't feel bad. She felt validated, like the universe had finally confirmed what she had always believed. That she deserved more. That I deserved less. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't trust myself to speak. She touched my arm briefly. A performance for the lawyer. Then she gathered her things. As she walked toward the door, she said something that still echoes in my head. They did what they thought was fair. Fair. The door closed behind her. I was alone with the lawyer. He looked uncomfortable now, like someone who had just delivered bad news and wanted to escape. I stood up. I thanked him. I turned toward the door. That's when he spoke again. "Emily." I stopped. Not because I expected anything, but because something in his tone had changed. I turned around. "Yes?" He hesitated, then said, "Please sit back down." I didn't want to. Every instinct in my body told me to leave, to preserve whatever dignity I had left. But I sat. He picked up another document, one that hadn't been read yet. "I apologize," he said carefully. "There is a final clause." My heart didn't race. Not yet. I assumed it was a formality. A sentence explaining why I was excluded. Something official to seal it. He continued. "This clause was requested to be read only after the primary beneficiary had exited the room." I swallowed. That wasn't normal. The lawyer looked at me directly now, not with pity, with focus. "This section is addressed specifically to you." The room felt suddenly smaller. My name sat heavy in the air between us. "For years," he read, "we struggled with how to handle this." My parents' words. In writing. I hadn't heard them speak directly to me in years. I felt my chest tighten. The lawyer continued reading. Not fast, not slow, deliberate. As parents, we failed to see the damage we were causing while it was happening. I stopped breathing. By the time we understood it, we feared it was too late. My hands clenched in my lap. This clause exists not as an apology, but as a responsibility. Responsibility? I didn't understand yet, but for the first time that day, I felt something else. Something unfamiliar. Anticipation. The lawyer paused again. Then he said the words that changed everything. Emily, you are named as the sole executor of the estate. I stared at him. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Additionally, he continued, you retain full authority over the implementation of all conditional distributions. Conditional. Nothing about this was unconditional. My parents hadn't given Sophia everything. They had given her access, and they had given me control. The lawyer placed the document in front of me. There is more, he said quietly, but I think you should take a moment. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there, staring at my name printed clearly on the page. For the first time in my life, I wasn't an afterthought. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't excluded. And suddenly, I understood something terrifying. This wasn't a gift. It was power. And my sister had no idea what was coming. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not Sophia, not extended family, not even friends. I walked out of that office with a copy of the documents pressed against my chest like they might disappear if I loosened my grip. The air outside felt different. Not lighter, not happier, sharper. Because once you realize you have power, you also realize how carefully it has to be used. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to explain myself. I didn't rush to justify anything. I went home. I read everything, every clause, every condition, every carefully worded sentence my parents had left behind. And slowly, painfully, a picture formed. They hadn't trusted Sophia. Not completely. They had loved her loudly, publicly, generously, but they had trusted me. Quietly, privately, legally. The inheritance wasn't simple. Sophia didn't own the house. She was allowed to live in it, as long as certain conditions were met. The business wasn't hers either. She could operate it, but she couldn't sell it, restructure it, or take on debt without approval. My approval. The money accounts had limits, oversight, reviews, and all of it came back to one role. Executor. Me. The daughter they ignored. The one they underestimated. The one they never defended. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Because power hits differently when you've lived without it your whole life. A week passed. Sophia didn't call. Why would she? In her mind, the story was over. She posted subtle things online. Quotes about grief, about strength, about carrying on the family legacy. People praised her. They always did. Then the calls started. First from the bank. They needed authorization for a large transfer Sophia had attempted. I declined it. Politely. Formally. Then the business accountant called. Sophia wanted to restructure ownership percentages. I said no. No explanation. Just no. By the third call, the tone shifted. Confusion crept in. By the fifth, concern. And then finally Sophia called me. Her voice was calm, too calm. Hey, she said like nothing had changed. I think there's been a mistake. I listened. I didn't interrupt. She explained that things were being delayed, that approvals were missing, that people kept asking for my signature. I waited until she finished. Then I said, "There's no mistake." Silence. Longer than I expected. "What do you mean?" she asked. I took a breath. "I'm the executor." Another pause, then a small laugh. "No, you're not." I almost smiled. "I am." Her voice tightened. "That doesn't make sense." "It didn't need to," I said. "It's legal." She changed tactics quickly. Sophia always did. She softened her tone. She told me she was overwhelmed, that she needed help, that this was too much responsibility. I listened again. Then I said, "I'll review everything according to the will. Nothing more. Nothing less." She hung up shortly after. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was scared, but because memories surfaced, moments I had buried. The times Sophia had spoken for me, over me, about me. The times she had let my parents misunderstand, and benefited from it. I realized something then. This wasn't revenge. This was balance. A few days later, we met. She chose the location, the family house. Of course she did. She greeted me like a host, walking through rooms she didn't own the way she thought she did. She offered coffee, sat across from me, and then dropped the mask. "You need to fix this," she said. I didn't respond immediately. "I have bills," she continued. "Plans, expectations." Still nothing. "You don't understand how this works," she snapped. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. Not loudly, not angrily, just fact. She stared at me, really stared, like she was seeing me for the first time. "You wouldn't do this to me," she said. "After everything." Everything. I thought about that word, about how differently we defined it. "I'm not doing anything to you," I replied. "I'm doing exactly what they asked." That unsettled her. She leaned forward. "You think this makes you important?" she asked. "You think this changes who you are?" I met her gaze. "I think it already has." She tried guilt next. She talked about how close she had been to our parents, how she had stayed, how she had sacrificed. I let her speak, because listening was something I had learned to do very well. When she finished, I said one sentence. "If you were so trusted, they wouldn't have needed me." That's when her face changed. Not anger, fear, real fear. Weeks passed. I enforced everything by the book. No favors, no shortcuts. Reviews were scheduled. Spending was limited. Decisions were documented. The house required maintenance Sophia hadn't kept up with. I flagged it. The business wasn't performing. I intervened. Professionally, legally. She accused me of punishing her. I never raised my voice. I never explained myself emotionally, because emotion is what she was used to controlling. This time, there was only structure, rules, consequences. And slowly, quietly, her world tightened. Friends stopped praising. Advisors stopped indulging. People started calling me first. One afternoon, she showed up unannounced. She looked different, tired, smaller. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said. I looked at her, at the sister who had always stood in front of me, and never once looked back. "I'm not doing this to you," I said again. "I'm doing this instead of disappearing." She shook her head. "You've always been dramatic." I stood up, and that's when I realized something important. For the first time in my life, I didn't care what she thought, because power doesn't come from being believed. It comes from being unavoidable. She left without another word, and as the door closed behind her, I felt it. Not joy, not triumph, but clarity. The kind that tells you the final chapter is coming, and that this time, I would be the one deciding how it ended. Revenge is loud in movies. People scream, things break. Someone always wins in a dramatic way. This wasn't like that. This was quieter, colder, and far more final. By the time Sophia realized how serious the situation was, it was already too late. The business had been bleeding money for months. Not because it couldn't survive, but because it had been mismanaged. Contracts signed without thought. Expenses justified by ego. Decisions made to look impressive instead of effective. I didn't step in to embarrass her. I stepped in because I was required to. That's the thing about responsibility. When you've carried it your whole life without recognition, you don't panic when it finally has weight. I commissioned an independent audit. Sophia called it betrayal. The report called it negligence. According to the will, continued control required competence. She no longer qualified. I removed her from operational authority. Legally. Quietly. She still had access to income. Still had a roof over her head. But the power she thought was hers was gone. She cried that day. Not in front of me, in front of the people who used to praise her. And for the first time, sympathy felt different. It wasn't protective. It was cautious. The house was next. My parents had tied residence to maintenance, community involvement, and financial stability. Sophia had ignored all three. I gave her notice. Not eviction. Options. Downsize. Sell. Or comply. She accused me of cruelty. I read her the clause, word for word. She begged. That part surprised me. Not because she begged, but because she expected it to work. It always had before. "I'm your sister," she said. "Family doesn't do this." I looked at her, and finally said what I had never been allowed to say. "Family also doesn't disappear you." She stopped crying then, like the words had taken something out of her. The sale of the house went through smoothly. I didn't keep it. I didn't want it. Some places hold too much silence. I took my portion according to the will and placed the rest into structured accounts. Sophia still received money. Just not freedom without accountability. Months passed. The chaos settled. The calls slowed. And one evening, I received a message from Sophia. Not a demand, not an accusation, a request. She wanted to talk. We met somewhere neutral. No memories, no territory. She looked different again. Quieter, less certain. She didn't start with anger this time. She started with a question. Did they really trust you more than me? I thought about that, about my parents, about their failures, about their silence. "They trusted me to do what was hard," I said. "They trusted you to be loved." She nodded slowly. "I didn't know," she said. "Not really." And for the first time, I believed her. Because favoritism blinds everyone involved, including the one benefiting from it. "I spent my whole life thinking I was better than you," she admitted. "And now I don't even know who I am without that." I didn't comfort her, but I didn't attack her either. "Neither did I said. "I just learned earlier." We sat in silence, not the heavy kind, the honest kind. In the end, she stood. "I don't forgive you," she said. "I didn't ask you to," I replied. She left, and I didn't feel guilty, because closure doesn't require forgiveness. It requires truth. People ask me if I hate my parents. I don't. Hate requires energy they no longer deserve. What I feel is understanding. They loved imperfectly. They failed quietly. And in the end, they tried to correct something they could never fix directly. They gave me something they never gave me in life. Authority. Not over money. Not over people. Over my own worth. I didn't take revenge. I didn't destroy my sister. I didn't rewrite the past. I simply stopped accepting a role I never agreed to play. And when the lawyer spoke my name that day, it wasn't about inheritance. It was about recognition. Finally, my name is Emily. I am 29 years old, and this was the moment I stopped being invisible.